Okay, Claire, what is tip number 3, please?
Tip number 3 is, so we've talked about teaching well, teaching securely. So this is checking for understanding. So which again sounds really, really obvious, but this is getting away from your teacher who's going, but I've got to get through, the whole conveyor belt curriculum. Mark McCourt talked about that. It's a train leaving the station, to mix my metaphors. It's going, and we just have to carry on because we won't get to the end. And actually, well, that's pointless because, again, it's about what they're learning, not about what you're teaching, and it's better that what you have taught, they've learnt, than you can just go, well, I've taught it. Hey, not my fault if I didn't learn it. So checking for understanding, lots of ways of doing that. I love Tom Sherrington says the simple sentence of saying, so instead of saying, do you understand? If you say, do you understand? Like most kids will go, yeah. Because for 2 reasons. Either they're too embarrassed to say, no, not really. Or they think they do understand. You know, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. So he said, just flip that on your head and ask the question, what do you understand? Hey, so Craig, what do you understand? That was another name for it. So Michelle, what do you understand? So, and then, you know, don't just ask one person. Don't just ask one person and think, oh, well, he's got it, so therefore everyone's got it. So you're being really forensic about checking for understanding. And then, of course, you check for understanding, and when, you know, if they all do understand, great, good to go. But when you find that they don't, or some students don't, then you flex your teaching in response. That you address the fact that they can't. So that might be in the moment, or you might go, I am going to have to mentally park that because nearly everyone else has got it. Those two haven't. Yeah, I do need to carry on, but I've banked that to do something at some point with them soon, really soon. Maybe within the lesson, it may be after the lesson, in intervention, whatever. But you're not just ignoring it, so you're flexing your teaching from the information. Now, how do you do that? Key things are using whiteboards, and like there's a big thing on Twitter at the moment with lots of primary school teachers going, I can't believe people are going, whiteboards, we've used them for 20 years, for heaven's sake. Yeah, well, good for you. Brilliant. You carry on doing that. Not everybody has, believe me, they haven't. And some secondary schools have, some secondary schools haven't. Maybe some primary schools haven't. So if you have, good for you. If you haven't, you're missing a trick. You need to be using whiteboards so that you can see, in the moment, you can see what people are doing and how they're doing, how they've done, so that you can flex your teaching. There's also, you know, this is from the Teach Like a Champion playbook, what is called cold calling, which I think is a really unfortunate name because it sounds, I mean, you know, it's just meant to be like, cold calling is when people phone up and try and sell you double glazing, isn't it? That's where it comes from. But people just see it as cold and see it's about catching kids out and it can make kids anxious. Like cold calling isn't any of those things. It only thrives in a classroom culture that's warm and supportive, where error is seen as useful, like, you know, kids feel safe to make mistakes and see them as useful, and where they understand that you asking them a question without them volunteering the answer, it's like they expect to be asked questions is because you care about them and about their learning. So that's what cold calling is. I talked about this, so, you know, whiteboards, cold calling, I talked about this a bit with literacy. Call and response is a really underused mechanism. So, you know, what are we going to do now? We're going to do questions 1 to 5. They know, we're all going to do that. We all know that. And then show call, which is a variation on cold calling. It's the same thing, but that's where you're sharing a piece of writing or a piece of something written. And then critique. So probably not so much a math thing. Well, it could be, I suppose, but it could be like, let's look at your steps where you work something out. Or a piece of writing, put it onto the visualizer, and or whatever you've got to be able to do that. And then really analyze it and critique it and make it better, make it even better. You know, it's probably fine. And again, but these all require classrooms with warm, supportive ethos where, you know, you don't have kids rolling their eyes or laughing or smirking because somebody's made a mistake. Like, you have no tolerance for that whatsoever. So, yeah, what do you understand? Checking for understanding, being really forensic. And it might not necessarily be, oh no, that's tip number 4. I was going to say it might be after the lesson, but I've remembered. No, shh, wait.
This is great. Okay, well, let me just dig into this a little bit. I'm obsessed with checking for understanding class. It's right up my street there. So just a couple of things. I like Doug Lamar, again, we're both huge fans. Right, I think it's tip number 1 in Teach Like a Champion 2.0, and then he shifted it a little bit longer in 3.0, where he has either reject or now he says replace self-report, because that's your classic thing where, as you say, do you understand? What I like that Doug does there is he says, if you find yourself wanting to say, do you understand, that's really good because you've recognised that it's the right point in the lesson where you need a check for understanding, and then you can step in and do something like you've said with Tom Sherrington's idea of just, it's not a massive change to your teaching, is it? You've recognised it's the point in the lesson to do it. Yeah. You've just got to make sure it's an actual check of understanding and not a check of students' perception of understanding. Yeah. So I really like that. I
also like Alan Boxer wrote this brilliant thing. It's like, this is a real that, when we understand something in the moment, you get this sort of endorphin rush and it feels good. Like, when it clicks, and it feels great. And so, you think, I understand that now, because you've had this feeling. And so, but your memory, when you go back to it, it's like, I understand that. Now, what you're remembering is the feeling of understanding it. Now, but understanding is dependent on remembering it. So you can't understand something and have forgotten it. But you might go, I understand that. Well, what you're remembering is the feeling of understanding it, not actually understanding it. And the two are different.
That's lovely. I've never thought of that distinction. That's really, really nice. I really like that. And my second and final just point on this is something I discussed with Jo Morgan, a secondary maths teacher. She said that a lot of the emphasis on check for understanding and responsive teaching is on the checking for understanding and not so much on the responding. And you've alluded to this point yourself. Like, if you do the check and it reveals that there's a problem, you've got to then respond to that. If you just crack on regardless, there's no point in doing the check for understanding. But it's a thing, isn't it, right? Like, if you've put all your thought into the check for understanding and you haven't thought, all right, what am I going to do if it goes this way or this way? It's problematic, isn't it?
And that's why that goes back to my earlier point about being super clear about what you want to teach. So again, you've got your teacher saying, well, I'm not going to go right back because that would be ridiculous. So, okay, maybe you're not, but then you check for understanding. You think, maybe I do need to go right back. But you know what that right back goes to. So it'd be like, oh God, I don't even know what each means. What is going wrong here? All right, I know that. I've got that. I know what the likely things that could have gone wrong have gone wrong, and I've checked for understanding, and it's like, oh, okay. Back we go. But I really like Mark McCourt's phrase about conveyor belt teaching, and that we shouldn't be doing that. And somebody, I don't know if it was him, somebody said, we're teachers, not broadcasters. So, when you broadcast the program, it just carries on regardless, doesn't it? And that's why teaching during lockdown was hard, because you were sort of in broadcast mode, and that checking for understanding was much harder. Particularly if you weren't allowed to have cameras on, or particularly if it wasn't even live teaching, if it was asynchronous teaching, it was really hard. So you couldn't check for understanding, and you were in broadcast mode, and kids caught what they caught, but it was suboptimal, to put it mildly. So we're teachers, not broadcasters, which means we're checking for understanding, and we're flexing in the moment and responding to that because we are super clear about what they want to know. We know what the misconceptions are, and we can pivot.
Fantastic.